Treasurer Jim Chalmers warns of significantly higher inflation as the Prime Minister jets off to Europe. The auction market cools even further with a flurry of properties pulled over the weekend, and corporate America stands up for women's rights following the Supreme Court's abortion ruling. It's Monday, the 27th of June, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Adam Lang.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, we've got some very good news, obviously, for listeners. Adam, if you are here, then that means that after some very sleepless nights for Sean Aylmer, he got his passports and he is off on his holiday with his family.
11 weeks plus in the waiting and time in queue on top of that. It was very stressful for him. We're all happy he's gone. I mean that in the nicest possible way.
And I shall be replaying that to him when he returns. I'll be doing it out of context as well. So all he hears is
with some subtle edits, that could sound quite evil.
I'm happy he's gone. That's what we all heard. Now, look, immediately after the show, we've got a really great chat with Tim Harcourt, the airport economist. We've spoken to him in the past, but he is an expert on China. He hosts a television program called After the Pandemic. And in the chat with us, he speaks about whether the world's second largest economy is open for business once again. Obviously, China has been pursuing a zero COVID policy, and it has really made global supply chains and business within China very, very difficult. So it is a great chat. Stick around for that one if you can. But the main story this morning, Adam, we are being warned again to prepare for much higher inflation, but that the cost of living crisis could ease by next year. This is according to the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, who gave a pretty wide-ranging interview to the ABC yesterday. We're about a month away now from the Treasurer delivering an economic and fiscal update to Parliament, and he says that the Reserve Bank's inflation forecast of 7% by the end of the year may not actually be far off.
Michael, Sean talked about this in the weekend edition where there's so many different views on will we go into recession, won't we, how long will these cost of living pressures stick around? So it's the source of much debate. I watched the show Insiders with Jim Chalmers on it, and he's going to deliver a new federal budget in October and says the outlook for inflation has worsened significantly since Josh Frydenberg's budget was handed down in late March. And already that seems like such a long time ago. All of this we already knew, but it does speak to the worsening challenge of inflation, which keeps the pressure really high on the Reserve Bank to increase rates.
And Adam, speaking of the Reserve Bank, the Treasurer actually talked a bit about the planned review of the RBA. It hasn't been formally announced yet, but it's going to be an independent review of the central bank.
Yes, he did. And one of the things Jim Chalmers mentioned was the composition of the board. He wants to make sure that it represents all parts of the country and the economy. The 9-member current board has 5 business people, but there are calls for more professional economists and also union calls for worker representation to be restored.
And Adam, it's worth mentioning too that Jim Chalmers was standing by the Prime Minister's decision to cut additional advisory staff for crossbench MPs and senators from 4 to 1. A bit of controversy there for the Prime Minister. The crossbench is up in arms about it, but PM Anthony Albanese is on the other side of the world right now. He left for Europe yesterday for a NATO leaders summit in Madrid before then heading to Paris to meet French President Emmanuel Macron. Did you know it's been 14 years, Adam, since an Australian leader attended a NATO meeting? The last Prime Minister to do so was Kevin Rudd back in 2008.
Isn't that stunning?
Yeah.
So our new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is certainly becoming a globetrotter, at least relatively. The Prime Minister said the NATO summit came at a critical time, with the war in Ukraine carrying consequences that reached far beyond Europe. While Australia is not a member of the organisation comprised of 30 nations, it is the largest non-NATO contributor to Ukraine in terms of military aid. And Mr Albanese said he was pleased to accept the invitation from Mr Macron, who famously called former Prime Minister Scott Morrison a liar, describing France as an important partner.
We are going to be in for a very big week. It's going to be a very interesting week. And just having a quick look at local markets, at the end of last week, the S&P ASX 200 finished up 0.8% to 6,579 points. It was 1.6% higher for the week. Tech stocks really rallied hard following a strong lead from Wall Street. CSL, Wesfarmers, Telstra, Woolworths, Coles, Aristocrat Leisure and Goodman Group all did well. The banks were pretty mixed. The biggest laggard, which I know is one of Sean's favourite words, so I thought I'd use it today in honour of him, was the energy index after oil prices fell further.
It is really interesting, Michael, that some of the worst performing stocks on the bourse this year did very well on Friday. Tracking group Life360 jumped 25%. Buy now, pay later operator Zipco was up 22%. Biotech Imugene rose 18%. Data connectivity player Megaport closed up 16%. And battery group Novonix rose 13%. It was also a big week for bonds. Now, we know Sean loves talking about them too. Yields fell sharply on 3 and 10-year bonds by their most in about a decade, reflecting a flight to safety mentality among investors.
Adam, I mentioned the strong lead-in from Wall Street. Wall Street ended the weekend higher with the broad-based S&P 500 and the tech-heavy NASDAQ both up more than 3%.
Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis President James Bullard said fears of a US recession are overblown as consumers have plenty of cash built up during the COVID-19 pandemic. European stocks were also up sharply on Friday, pushing them into positive territory for the week. The European Stock 600 index had its best session in more than 3 months, jumping 2.6%.
The Aussie dollar, Adam, is buying a touch over 69 US cents, though Sean wants us all to know that he changed his money at 66 US cents and he is not happy, though I think he should just be happy that he's on holidays. Brent crude recovered some ground over the weekend as well, though it finished the week lower, while gold was also slightly higher over the weekend.
Michael, and just quickly on commodities, copper is considered a bellwether commodity and it's been very strong in recent times, but late last week it fell to its lowest level since February last year, just demonstrating how the heat is coming out of the commodities market. It's now off about 14% from its peak at the beginning of the month. Now, okay, that's not exactly a bloodbath, but 14% is certainly a sharp sell down.
Yeah, it sure is. All right, we are underway. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Adam, Qantas CEO Alan Joyce says passengers need to get used to higher ticket prices and more crowded planes because of high fuel prices, which is not really something that we want to hear on the first day of school holidays for a lot of students. He was announcing new direct flights from Perth to Johannesburg and to Jakarta and said the airline's yearly fuel bill exceeded $4 billion and the company was cutting capacity across Qantas and Jetstar by 10% because of oil prices. The company's fuel bill will be $1.7 billion higher next year. Isn't that incredible? That is higher than pre-COVID-19 levels. And obviously, therefore, airfares are on the way up.
Now, I've been wincing at the petrol Bowser in recent months, as we all have, but imagine saying fill her up and just clocking over $4 billion in a year.
Yeah, it puts it in perspective a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. So Mr. Joyce blamed Qantas's current problems around customer dissatisfaction, missing baggage and cancelled flights on COVID-19 induced staffing and supply chain issues. He said it was hitting all parts of the business, including airport security and air traffic control were also being hit. And many people who left aviation 2 years ago have had to be retrained. But he was confident things would improve.
Adam, it seems that staffing generally seems to be a pretty tricky issue for Qantas at the moment.
Oh, that's so true. The airline has promised a $5,000 bonus to 19,000 staff covered by enterprise bargaining agreements on the condition that they approve the next industrial agreement put to them. Now, the carrier is offering a 2% pay increase across the group. The group is even losing senior staff, with Jetstar boss Gareth Evans saying he will quit the low-cost airline next year.
All right, now away from airlines, we talk a lot about the property market, Adam, and there's a pretty interesting development over the weekend. It seems there's been a spike in the number of sellers pulling their properties before auction, not because they've sold it early, but because of a lack of interest.
That's right, Michael. And it's really another sign of people testing the market and finding that it's cooling. The Financial Review says 28% of the scheduled auctions in Sydney were withdrawn on the weekend. That's the highest rate since April 2020, which was, of course, the first month, really, of lockdowns. So listings were down by more than 22% in Melbourne, but the clearance rate rose slightly to 61%.
All right, now, Adam, the Packers, after many decades, have left the world of listed Australian companies, at least in terms of kind of high-profile investments. It's a pretty momentous day on Friday when the $8.9 billion buyout of Crown Resorts was completed. The new owner, private equity group Blackstone, has vowed to rebuild the gaming giant, which from today won't be traded on the ASX after 15 years of doing so. Major shareholder James Packer walks away with $3.26 billion. Blackstone says it wants to grow Crown into an iconic destination for travel and leisure that everyone can be proud of. It was a pretty big week last week for Crown, which also included getting the go-ahead for its Sydney licence at Barangaroo.
Yes, Michael, and you might have also seen an interview with James Packer in The Australian over the weekend. He says he'll be returning to Australia in March next year. He says he's off 7 different drugs prescribed to him by his doctors, and he's lost a lot of weight. And I have to say, it's good to see him looking and sounding well and in control of his health.
Yeah, completely agree with you on that one. And just briefly, still in the gaming sector, Adam, the Star Entertainment Group is also in the news. Its application for more gaming machines has been rejected by the New South Wales government.
It's not really that surprising, and the Star said the decision was in response to a period of significant change for the casino sector. I think that's just a tad of an understatement.
Yeah, just a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Now, the Victorian state government front bench looks a little bit different this morning, Adam. Last week, we heard about the wholesale resignations and decisions not to run at November's state election, and that triggered a wide reshuffle.
Yes, and the highest profile departure at the next election will be Deputy Premier James Merlino. He said he'd been thinking of leaving for 12 months. 4 cabinet ministers have announced their intention not to run in the next election for various reasons. Mr Merlino will be replaced by Jacinta Allen, who, like Mr Andrews, is from the socialist left faction of the party. 2 leaders from the same faction is actually unusual for the Labor Party.
All right. Now, Adam, there is always something interesting from the Bureau of Statistics.
Oh, yes, there is.
And for a data nut like yourself, and I mean that very respectfully, you must be in some kind of heaven when there is a new release out from the ABS. Having said that, this particular release is not really good news at all. The National Health Survey from the ABS says that nearly 3/4 of Australians have at least one long-term health condition and nearly half have a chronic condition.
Michael, it is concerning, but the great part of this is that we do have the data. And so mental and behavioural conditions, back problems and arthritis were the most common chronic conditions, long-term illnesses that contribute to premature death. And they were followed by asthma and diabetes. Making up the top 10 were cancer, osteoporosis, kidney disease, cardiovascular disease, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. It doesn't paint a picture of health of Australians, though 57% of people aged over 15 consider themselves to be in excellent or very good health, and only 14% in fair or poor health. So we think we're doing okay.
Yeah, that's not actually too bad in terms of the 57% thinking that they're in excellent or very good health. That's probably higher than I was expecting.
Yeah, but then you get the data and it says actually we're not all well.
All right. Now, remember the story last week of Lake Resources? We talked about it a fair bit last week. This was the lithium group that joined the ASX 200 on Monday, only to see its share price halved in 4 trading sessions. It bounced on Friday, jumping more than 15%.
Yes, and its chair, Stu Crow, hit back at short sellers of the stock. That's investors who are taking positions based on their view that a share price will fall. He said short sellers were at risk because Lake was on the verge of announcing some new appointments to major projects and the board. He also criticised the, quote, scuttlebutt that rattles the cage of not-so-savvy retail investors, end of quote, and whack.
Yeah, I love that word, scuttlebutt. Isn't that fantastic? You love a chair, a company chair, who is almost kind of Keating-esque, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't mind throwing a grenade, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. And just staying in the lithium world for a moment, European automaking giant Stellantis has bought 8% of ASX-listed lithium miner Vulcan Energy. Stellantis manufactures Peugeot, Maserati, Fiat, Chrysler, Alfa Romeo vehicles. It's pushing into EVs now. Vulcan's share price jumped 27%. And just one last one, Adam, before we get to the overseas news, Rex has signed a 10-year agreement with Flight Centre to be the travel agency's partner of choice over the next decade.
Yes, Regional Express called it a landmark agreement. The airline has also signed agreements with agencies Hello World, Webjet, Consolidate Travel and Corporate Travel Management to improve its competitiveness in the domestic aviation space. They're all pretty big deals.
Yeah, they certainly are. All right, now moving on to overseas news, and really one story has just consumed everybody's attention now for the last couple of days. The fallout from the US Supreme Court overturning the Roe v. Wade decision has been immense. It's still happening now. The Supreme Court overturned the 49-year-old abortion precedent with a majority ruling of 6-3, with states now able to outlaw or limit access to abortions. 13 states took immediate steps to do that. And there have been protests right across the US and a fair bit of outrage right across the world, in fact.
Michael, this draft decision was leaked a month ago, and what we're seeing now is a huge response from companies across America. And this is the point at which politics, judiciary and business meet. Some of the biggest companies in the world, like Apple, Amazon, Tesla, Disney, Microsoft, Meta, big banks like JP Morgan, even Australia's own Atlassian, are now offering travel assistance for staff who need to travel to a state in the US where it is legal to have an abortion. US President Joe Biden has reiterated the right of women to travel to seek the care they need, saying his administration will defend that bedrock right. Former President Donald Trump has taken credit for the Supreme Court ruling, having appointed 3 conservative judges to the bench during his term.
Yeah, it is a major story, and I'm sure we'll continue to see the fallout from it this week. And Adam, just a quick change of pace now, something a little bit lighter for us to finish on. We've had plenty of stories about the most expensive cities in the world. Now, here's one about the most livable cities. The Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Livability Index 2022. Now, that is a name that just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It was released late last week, and Vienna has come in at number 1.
Yes, Michael, and I'm very glad you didn't use an acronym for the Economist Intelligence Unit's Global Livability Index. And we'll do a quick trip around the world for the key cities here. Vienna, followed by Copenhagen, Zurich, and Canada's Calgary and Vancouver. The list looks more like it did pre-COVID. The 10th most livable city in the world is Melbourne, according to the report. London and Los Angeles jumped up the ranking, and at the bottom, Lagos in Nigeria, Tripoli in Libya, and Algiers in Algeria.
All right. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Tim Harcourt, basically asking the question, is China open for business again? It's an important one for investors, for businesses, and for the broader Australian economy. And don't miss the week ahead with our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas. Retail sales, job vacancies, house prices, and credit growth all on the agenda this week. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 27th of June, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.